Listener discretion advised.
If you've been affected by the rampant opioid epidemic, as we have, then this podcast is for you. We want to bring hope to those suffering from heroin addiction and shed light on its darkness. Let's share an environment where we can discuss all aspects of heroin addiction without shame or judgment. Our mission is to educate the community about heroin and its deadly sidekick, fentanyl. How easy it is to get, how easy it is to become addicted, the latest treatments, and its newest targets. JCF is a nonprofit organization created to honor the life of Jeremy Castro, who passed away from a fentanyl overdose in 2017. Now, my family and I are doing our part to combat this opioid epidemic. I'm Rebecca Castro. I lost my brother and many friends to heroin, and I made this show to demand eradication of this epidemic. Mom, do you remember the first time that I had a suspicion that Jeremy had started to shoot up heroin?
Yes, I do. I remember. And I remember I didn't believe you.
Yeah, the situation was very strange. I saw my brother, acting differently than his normal behavior. And I got a glimpse of his arm. And I saw what I didn't know at the time were track marks. And it was very suspicious to me, and I questioned him about it, and he told me, I was climbing a wall and I scraped my arm. And I remember not believing it, and I remember going to you and telling you, and you just almost being in total denial. I don't blame you ever for that, but it was a...
Well, he also told me that he was climbing up a wall on a stucco wall, and because I asked him about it, and they were just like teeny little scabs, teeny little red scabs. And I asked him about it, and he said, I was just climbing up a wall, and I slid down. I'm like, huh. And then I think a day or two later, you came and told me, and I said, no, he got that from sliding down a wall.
Mm-hmm. I actually remember being a little bit frustrated with you, thinking, how can you really believe that? But now I understand, something that horrible, it's hard to wrap your head around.
It was a shock. I'm like, what? That just came out of left field. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. It's like if I were to say, Rebecca, your hair's purple. Mm-hmm. And you go, no, it's not. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
That's how it is. And then I think 2 days later, Daniel, my youngest son, came to me and said, Mom, you really have to realize Jeremy's using something really bad. Mm-hmm. And I looked at him point blank, and it was a Friday. It was a Friday night. And I looked at him and I just said, Daniel, are you telling me that your brother is shooting up heroin? And he looked at me and he said, yes, Mom.
Yeah. And I think that it was a little bit more believable for Daniel and I because we really saw his behavior on a regular basis. I mean, he was our best friend. We hung out with him in the backyard. We were in his room with the dog, with Gus. And so it was something that had been coming on that we had seen in his behavior that it was gradually changing. But I think he did a really good job of trying to hide that from you and Dad. So I understand why you guys had absolutely no idea. But for me and Daniel, it was something where, it was getting really bad. He was treating us mean. He wasn't, being his nice, normal self. So at that point, when we came to you, I think as opposed to being sad, we were a little bit more fed up than anything, just with everything that had been going on.
Yeah, and I know that I denied it when you said it, but when both my kids come to me and say it, it's like, oof, you have to you have to believe it. You know, there was no reason for you to even talk like that or suggest that. So I knew it was real.
And I mean, at that point, what was it, 2 days later, we had an intervention with all the family. So yeah, you wasted no time. You acted very quickly.
It was actually the next day.
Yeah.
I completely fell apart. Started researching, you know, everything. And when you hear this, I mean, I know there's shows on TV that talk about addiction and here's what you do to help the addict and blah, blah, blah. But when you first find out about it, it's literally, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Do I turn left? Do I turn right? Do I take a step? What do I do? And I started researching, but, you know, for rehabs and things like that. But, you know, rehabs are a sale. It's a sale thing. Like, yes, come to our rehab. We'll help him. We'll fix him. And I was a basket case. I mean, I remember talking to a counselor, and I couldn't even talk. And so then I went to your father, and I said, you know, I don't know what to do. And he's so practical. And he said, call the insurance company. And I'm like, what?
If anyone knows Ed Castro,
yes,
they know that's what he would say.
Call our insurance company. You know, first, what kind of coverage do you have? Give me a list of doctors. How do I get him in? As fast as possible, you know, and, you know, as, I don't know, kind of out there as it sounds, that's what worked. You know, we were fortunate enough to have insurance. And so we utilized that, and they kind of guided me, you know, and I said, I don't know what to do. And of course I was bawling on the phone with them. So I immediately called my family. You know, I called my sisters, my brother-in-law, my daughter, my son, my husband. And I'm like, I can't live like this. So we staged an intervention. And ironically, Jeremy and I used to watch the show Intervention all the time together. And he'd always like, Mom, come sit and watch this with me. And I would. And so, you know, it's like, okay, intervention, boom. And I called my family together the next morning. Jeremy was at work, and he came home about noon. And we were all sitting in the den. And I think, you know,
I remember you asked me and Daniel to write letters, meaningful letters.
Yes, I asked everybody to write a letter and, you know, saying what Jeremy, you know, how much they love him, what he means, whatever. And he walked into the room, and he looked stunned. He's like, what the hell's going on?
100%. He had no idea.
Yes. And I said, Jeremy, come in. We want to talk to you. And he just like, Mom, are you kidding me? You're staging an intervention.
Are you serious? You think I need this? I remember it. I remember.
So then we had it, and everybody read, everybody cried. And, you know, I was the last one. I said, Jeremy, if you don't agree to take treatment, you can't live here, you know? That was very hard to say, because where's he going to live? You know, so I said, you can't live here. And he said, I don't care. I'm not going to treatment. And he stormed out.
I remember he grabbed Gus. He got his huge duffel bag, and he walked out the front door and just started walking down the street.
And his skateboard. And he grabbed a big loaf of bread we get from Albertsons for 99 cents.
The French bread?
Yes. He was so quick on his feet. So, and he took off down the street with his backpack, the big thing, Gus, and a skateboard. And the bread. And I'm like, oh my God, where's he gonna go? And I had already lined up the rehab place, and a guy was there talking to me, and I said, I don't know, and you know what I'm doing, or where he's gonna go, where's he gonna sleep? And he said, don't worry, let's wait to hear back. You'll probably hear back from him, and wherever he is, we will come to him. We will go get him. And so I had my family still. Just thank God that we're such a tight family, really. And they were with me, and Jeremy came back a few hours later. He called me. His friend called, and he said, Jeremy's willing to go to treatment. And
I remember that.
but he doesn't want to go because of Gus. Gus is his dog that is his soulmate, And I said, I will take care of Gus for 30 days, And so Jeremy came back and said, Mom, I'll go to treatment if you watch Gus. And I said, of course. So they came and got him, or they said they were going to come and get him, and his friend actually ended up taking him and dropping him off. And I said, listen, you better make sure he gets there, okay? I want no nonsense. He needs this help. First, he was going to detox, and then he'd go on to rehab. And his friend took him, and he said, and Jeremy told him, when I'm high, everything seems normal. And when I'm not high, life is weird. So he'd gotten to the point where he couldn't even live a straight life. It was awkward. It was foreign to him. And he goes, I swear, just let me take this last hit. I'm going to go in. He was smoking heroin. And at that time. And so he took his last hit, went in, and that was it. And he called me constantly from that place. This place is so stupid. They don't know what they're doing. I'm going to walk out, blah, blah, blah. And I said, Jeremy, just stay through there. Plus, he was detoxing, so he was absolutely miserable. And I said, you have to stay. You have to stay, and you have to get to rehab. It'll be much better at rehab. Your body will be cleansed pretty much by then. And you're going to go to a place and you're going to heal and you're going to get better. And, he was crying, Mom, please come pick me up. Please come pick me up. And I said no. And so their in-house rehab was actually, about 20 miles away from us. So that was a good thing. I thought, well, he's not walking 20 miles. And at that place, they took away your cell phone for the first 30 days because they didn't want you making contacts and, having your friends come pick you up, like I know he would have done. And I wasn't able to talk to him, I think, for a week. And so finally, at the end of the week, he called, and he's just like, Mom, please, I hate it here. Come get me. This is stupid. All we do is talk. We go to therapy all day. I have to listen to everybody else's dumb stories. Everything. Everything. It's. I don't like this place. And he fought it every step of the way. And around day 20, he called me. He just never got it. He never, succumbed to the fact that he would live a heroin-free life. He didn't want to, in retrospect. I realized that. And he, day 20, he's still calling me saying, I'm walking out of here. And I have the counselors calling me, listen, Rose, he's out on the curb with all his belongings. We can't hold him here. This is a free will place. He either wants to be here or he doesn't. And I just at this point, I'm kind of getting pissed. You know what? You're going to stay there and we're going to clean up your ass, clean up your act, and you're going to rid yourself of this heroin. I was so, the constant preying on my heart and pulling on my heartstrings. It's you know what? I've had enough. And so, the counselor called me and said he was out there and he was going to leave. And I told my son Daniel, I put him on the phone. I said, Jeremy, if you walk out, I swear to God, I am taking Gus to the pound. And you know me, I will do it.
He freaked out.
Okay.
That's the only thing we could ever use as leverage.
I do love you kids, but when you piss me off enough or I get mad enough,
well, this is life
I'm
and
going to
death.
take action.
Exactly.
Exactly. And to me, it is life or death, and when he wouldn't go to rehab, it's like, oh my God, he's going to use and then he's going to die on the street,
I actually remember that also, and me and Daniel being so naive, and I think I got a little bit upset. I know Daniel was pissed off, but I got a little bit upset that you were saying that, thinking like, he's in such a fragile state right now and he's gone. The only thing he loves is his dog, and you're going to threaten him with that? Like, at first I was angry, but then I really started to realize the big picture of him staying there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I knew that was my only leverage. He didn't care about anything else.
He didn't.
I could say, I'm leaving you for... He wouldn't care, but he cared about Gus. And so I just said, I'm going to take him to the pound if you leave. You won't do that. I said, okay, bye.
I think you got in the...
I did get in the car. I think you
actually got in the car, because right at that moment, like when you were talking, like he was ready to go at that moment that you were saying, I will take your dog if you're trying to leave right now. So he was like, he was ready to leave and you were ready to leave. So yeah, it wasn't a threat. It wasn't an empty threat.
Well, it kind of was. I would never get rid of Gus. I love that dog. You know that.
I know.
And so I loaded Gus up in the car, and I know you kids were home. I loaded him up in the car and I drove off. I stormed off in my car. And then I went up the street and just parked. I'm like, okay, now what?
Yeah.
Now what, Rose?
Yeah.
And I called Daniel and I said, Daniel, do me a favor and call Jeremy and tell him that I just took off with Gus in the car. And I just sped away with Gus in the car. And he goes, Mom, you better not take Gus to the pound. I said, just do what I say. And so I was parked there, and 2 minutes later, I got a call from the counselor that said he came back. And I thought, oh, thank God. And he stayed the rest of the time. And I said, Jeremy, you just have to stay there 30 days. Back then it was like, 30 days, that's all rehab was. Now I know
it's not enough.
A 30-day rehab does nothing to change your life.
Nothing. Maybe detoxes you, but that's it.
That's all it does. And while you're there and you feel good because, you're sharing your story and this and that, and you feel confident, 30 days is not enough to change your life.
It's not enough to equip you with the life skills that you need after using heroin.
I think that, heroin does such a number on your brain that it takes a full year, in my mind, of not using to maybe get your clear thoughts back, where you can make rational decisions that are not governed by using. And so that was his first rehab.
That was the first time, but I think that really was what started all of his road to recovery. It was a long road and it was really rocky, but I mean, at the end, he eventually was at a good point before he passed. So, yeah, that was the first experience.
I just remember saying that first time and, being out there. And it was a beautiful place, just out in the middle of, an avocado orchard, and very pretty, very peaceful.
Woodsy, like he likes.
Woodsy. And I remember saying that, I said, you know what, Jeremy? We're going to do this once, and we're going to do it right. Meaning his rehab. And I really thought at the end of his 30-day stint that he'd be, quote, cured. I really did. And turns out he ended up going to rehab 2 more times, and even that didn't save him. So he passed away on April 26th, 2017.
My recollection of having a brother who used heroin for a few years, it was really tough. And now that I'm actually thinking about it, there's a lot of stuff that I think I intentionally blocked out because it's painful to relive. But, it's when they say that a heroin addict ruins families. It's not just the person. It really does, because at that point, I knew that Jeremy had started using something. In high school, he smoked weed. We smoked weed together. It was all innocent and fun. And we didn't always get along in high school. I'm definitely more of an extrovert and he's an introvert. But even in high school, it was nothing more than weed, I would say. Honestly, maybe some Xanax. That was, I don't know why, for whatever reason, that was a thing. And drinking and being on Xanax or whatever. But it was never really more than that, and it was never really an issue until it was after he came home from college, from Dominguez Hills, and I think that he didn't make the grades to play soccer. So then he moved home, and to me, that just kind of started the downward spiral. I would say, because me and my little brother were still living in the house, and so he moved back in. So it was Jeremy, myself, my little brother, all of us, pretty much adults at that point, or young adults, and then my two parents. So that right there, just having 5 adults living together can be a little bit tricky. But, me and my younger brother have always gotten along. Yeah, we fight here and there, but when Jeremy came home from college, it was kind of like a whole dynamic. I don't know exactly at what point he started smoking heroin. I just noticed his behavior just completely changed. He, first off, the way he looked, his eyes, he would come home and his eyes would be really big, and he'd have like these dark like circles and under his eyes. He looked like a completely different person. He was like white and pale, and then his attitude, that was just completely different. If he would come home high, he would be super happy and talkative, and then a few hours later he'd be in his room and I'd knock on the door and like, what do you want? Go away, just completely flipped. And so after living like that for a while, it kind of takes a toll on you. And it definitely did affect the family dynamic. I had the room right below Jeremy, so, all the time I would hear him up at like 2, 3, 4 in the morning. I don't know doing what. I'd hear footsteps in his room, just kind of thinking it's not normal. It's a Tuesday night. Like, why are you, Wednesday morning, whatever, why are you up at this time? And that was kind of something I noticed too, because he never really used to be a night owl like that. And now it was like every single night he was doing this. He wasn't, and it's kind of like at a point, like, when are you sleeping? How are you able to function? And like you said before, I realized that he got so deep in it that if he wasn't high, normal life was strange to him. He didn't know how to be. He was so moody and agitated all the time. I could say hi to him and he'd be like, screw you, like, don't look at me, all this stuff. And then, so it was definitely the appearance of him and his attitude overall that changed first. Then, through that, I started having problems with my mom and my parents because, he was living there, but he was so mean to me and calling me names, and my parents weren't doing anything about it, and sometimes my little brother and him would gang up on me, and I was the only girl, and I was very sensitive, so it was just a lot for me. And at that point, too, I started, I remember I came home one day, and I have a change jar, like a random, spare change jar that everyone has, and it was filled to the brim with quarters, honestly, maybe like $100 in there of quarters. And I remember coming home one day and my door just being wide open and my jar just being empty. And at that point, because you remember at that time I was working a bunch of different jobs, I was going to school, so I was really trying to be more independent. And just seeing that, I remember right then and there, I don't even know if I told my parents, because I just remember thinking, well, what are they going to do about it? Like, even if they replace the money, it's not about that. It's the principle of, like, this is my room, my space, and now it's being invaded. So I remember literally the next thing that I did, I went to Target and I bought my own doorknob with my own lock, installed it myself, and hid the spare key. And that from then on, that was really tough because I knew that he was going into all of our rooms when we weren't around to steal stuff so he could get money to use. And it just became a pattern and a cycle. And after that happening throughout the course of a couple years, I just really got fed up and I couldn't do it anymore. I was tired of the fighting. I was tired of hearing my mom always yelling at him. I was tired of my dad always yelling at my mom for not doing anything. It was just it was just toxic. It was a poisoned environment. And at that time, my dad has always told me to save your money and buy a house and this and that. And so I knew that I had wanted to move out and get my own place, but I don't know, there was just this one day where I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I don't like, my family's so close, but I hate being here. I hate being at home. I'm mad at my parents. Like, nothing's ever happy. So I immediately, like for months and months at a time, just started looking for places, and I finally found a place and, bought it. And even to this day, my mom says that I rushed into it a little bit, and maybe could have gotten a place with an attached garage or this or that. But I just remember finding a place that I loved and just so badly knowing that it was going to be my space. There was not going to be anyone breaking into my room, stealing my money, you know what I mean, calling me names, anything like that. So that's when I moved out, and things got better, because I would go over there and I didn't have to live in the drama. I could take myself out of it whenever I wanted to. But then after I moved out too, I just had a ton of guilt, thinking like, why did I leave my parents and my little brother to deal with this all alone? Like, I left them to deal with it, and I'm essentially running away from the situation. But mentally, it just got so exhausting. Like, I just couldn't do it anymore. And after I moved out, like I said, things got better, and my relationship with Jeremy did get better, because when I did see him, it was easy and it was fine. And, but I mean, for years and years, it was very, very challenging. And I think that a lot of people don't see that side. And, I never wanted to. I remember there were times when I would see Jeremy high, and it was a matter of, do I say something? Because if I say something, it's going to start a huge fight right now. So do I say something and call him out? Or do I just leave it alone and accept that he's high? That's not the kind of person I am. So I obviously always had to say something. And it always started a fight, and Jeremy hated me for it. I remember one time, like, looking him directly in the eyes, and he just looked at me, like, and told me, I effing hate you. Like, and I was so, because it was after I had told my mom, like, oh, Mom, Jeremy's high again. Like, he's high, go look at his eyes. I would do that every time, and I remember him saying that to me, and I felt so heartbroken, like I had done the wrong thing. Like, I should have never ever said anything to my mom in the first place about finding marks on his arm or anything, because as much as my brother was mean to me and would get down on me, I always loved him and looked up to him, and all I ever wanted was his acceptance. And so it was so hard to know that he hated me for trying to ultimately help him in the long run. So it was very emotional, a few years, and it definitely affected my younger brother as well, as much as he won't say it or talk about it. I just, there were times when we were just sitting together, just like, is this really happening? Like, is our brother a heroin addict? A few years ago, it was such a weird thing, heroin. It was like, what? Only crazy people, rich people, homeless people, whoever, like, those are the type of people that are doing it. Like, not Jeremy, like, not, he was an athlete. He came from a really good family. My parents have been happily married for 34 years now. And so it's just very foreign. And me and Daniel always just caught ourselves in a place where we're just like, I can't believe that this is our life. I can't believe that this is our brother. I can't believe that this is happening. I mean, just as you were in denial, I was in denial for a long time too. And it was rough. It was really rough until I moved out. And then at that point too, Jeremy did start getting better, and things started looking up, and our relationship was actually better than ever at that point. When I wasn't living with him and was just going over and seeing him, and he would actually come over to my place and hang out, and it was cool. Like, and it was cool for us to just like have a space where, you know, he could come hang and we weren't, you know, like bugged or whatever, because he was definitely an introvert, like I said, and he just always, you know, he always wanted to be left alone. He never, you know what I mean, always wanted to just be alone in his room or with his dog or whatever. So it was kind of, honestly too, I feel like my house was a little bit of an escape for him also, just from the, you know, drama, because it's not like he didn't know he was high. He knew he was high, and he knew that if you knew, he was gonna get yelled at, or, you know, there would be consequences. So yeah, it was tough. It definitely takes a toll on the whole family, and then, you know, you feel bad, and you feel bad for, I mean, personally, I felt bad for feeling sad, because then I don't want to go and talk to my parents and give them even more problems to deal with on top of, you know, my brother. So there's a lot of stuff that I held in until after my brother passed. And I mean, I love my mom, and ultimately she can handle anything, and she told me that. And now we've always been close, but I'm completely transparent with her about everything. So that's one good thing that came out of it. But definitely those 3 years of my life were probably the hardest years, and then including the year that he passed.
I know. I always felt bad for you, and the thing is, with an addict, you can't control an addict. You know, I hated that he called you those names, and I would go in and just say, you know, that's not cool, or whatever. And I'm like, how dare you talk to your sister that way and call her those names? That's not how we were raised, and that's not how we raised you. But, you know, it's almost like, and I hate to say this, it's almost like the devil lives in your house, you know?
Mm-hmm. But he wasn't like that when he wasn't high. It was only when he was high. And then, so it was only when he was high. So if he wasn't high, I could kind of avoid the bad moods and still hang out with him without having him be mad at me for no reason. But then it got to a point where he was using so much that he was just like always high. And so when he was coming down, that's when it would be the worst. Or if he was detoxing in some way and was physically hurting, you know, he would always take it out on me. And so it was okay in the beginning, and then it just got to a point where it just got worse and worse, to where I just didn't even want to have a relationship with him. And then the thing too, a big thing about it is all my family and friends have been so supportive, and even when, you know, even after high school when he started using, he would still, you know, go to parties and do stuff, and he would be out, you know, and I would notice that his eyes were like dark and black. And I just remember, like, honestly, and I hate to say it now, but I just remember being very, very embarrassed, like thinking, like, if anyone knows that he's using, like, and he's my brother, it's gonna look bad on me and my family. And, you know, we know so many people in the community, and, you know, through dad and sports and soccer and you know, so we know so many people. And I just kept thinking, like, this is gonna look so bad on our family. People are gonna judge us. And then, you know, my friends told me, like, no, it's, you know, of course it doesn't look badly on you, and you're such a good person and this and that. And, you know, I know that I'm a good person, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that my brother, a piece of me, is using, you know. And if he's out in public and people notice, it's just embarrassing, you know, having people come up to you like, oh, your brother's so high and this and that. Like, I remember someone did notice, and they did come up to me at a party and tell me. And it's like, how I didn't know how to react. Like, I'm not his babysitter, I'm not his mom. If I tried to go up to him and try and take him home, I know he would get mad at me, or, you know, call me stupid or call me mean names in front of his friends. And I didn't want to be bullied. So I just said, I don't even remember what I said. I think I just shrugged it off. And I think I actually ended up leaving, because I was just embarrassed. And the whole heroin thing was so foreign at that time, and like the worst thing you could ever do. And I'm like, and my brother's dabbling in it. It was just really very challenging mentally.
I remember our good friend saying that after Jeremy had been to maybe his second rehab, because of course he relapsed from the first 30-day stint, and again I said, you need to go to rehab. You can't live here. Like, the family is so miserable. And I remember our friends saying, isn't it ironic how the addict has all the control?
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? That hit me like a thunderbolt.
Me too.
And I thought, you know what? It ends today. And the next day I went in and I said, this is the way it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not tolerating your use anymore. You find a place to live. You go to rehab. I will support you again in rehab. I will watch your dog. I will do whatever it takes to get you clean. You cannot live here.
Mm-hmm.
You cause, fights between me and your dad. The kids are yelling at me because they think I'm not doing anything. But the addict has all the control.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think he may have moved out at that point. No, I don't think he moved out. I think he went to rehab for the second time. Mm-hmm. We tried a new place out by the beach, and he was much better. Like, he was much more willing to go.
Yeah.
But I remember up to this time I thought he was just smoking, so I think all the scab stories came after. And I remember it was February 2nd, 2015, Super Bowl Sunday, and that was the day, after all the drama you talk about, everybody living in the house, mm-hmm. my youngest son was going into the Navy. And, I kind of think that's maybe one of the reasons he joined, And Ed and I had a knot in our throat all day. Like, the tears were just right there, but we were holding them back, and Danny had never really left home before.
Little Guga.
He was, 19 years old?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, and I loved him. He was, from the time Danny was little, he was just like this little, this little angel or something.
That's what you think.
But, yeah, I know. But, and so we were very, emotional all day.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeremy was being so nice to me. And I know he was using at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, come on, Mom, come sit down. Let's watch the Super Bowl together, And then the guy from the Navy came to pick him up because, they come pick you up because
mm-hmm.
they want to get you there. And he just hung out for what I thought was a really long time. I'm like, my God, okay, just go. Like,
Leave,
oh my,
him.
You're killing me here.
I know,
like
I remember
hour
that.
And a half goodbye.
He came in and sat at the table. His recruiter, right, came in and sat at the table and was talking. And I remember, because I had a Super Bowl party, but I remember just being so sad and not being able to stay for it. I just remember hugging Daniel and holding in my tears. And then as soon as we got outside in the car, I just started bawling, so sad. And my friend that I was with was like, are you sure you don't want to stay? And I was like, I can't. I cannot stay for that. I don't want to drag it out. It was very emotional.
Well, yeah, your little baby is going off, for 4 years.
Yeah.
And so Ed and I were, sad, and then finally the counselor leaves with him. We said our goodbyes. It was tearful, not too bad, because I really tried to keep it together, mm-hmm. and so did Ed. But afterwards, You're
crying now. He's back.
I know. But, afterwards we just fell apart, and Ed just stayed quiet. I don't think he said another word the rest of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I just went and got in my pajamas, at 3 p.m. I needed to nurture myself, and I just went,
Self-love.
I was crying, and I...
Self-love all the way.
Pajamas. And so Jeremy's like, Mom, come in, come in here. Let's watch the Super Bowl together. So we were in the den, and I knew he was high, but you know what? I was too sad to even care. And what am I going to say to him anyway?
And too exhausted
He's
to even
high
cause
already.
a scene. Exactly.
Yeah. And he's like, I'm going to go out and get some snacks. I'm like, Jeremy, you don't need to go out and get snacks. He's like, yeah, I'll go out and get something you like, and we'll just sit here and, we'll watch the game, whatever. And he left. He said, I'm just going down the street. And he left. And so I thought he was going to 7-Eleven. He should have been back in 15 minutes. And an hour and a half later, he came back, And I knew he was high. And the game ended. And then you were here and Dad and...
Back from the party.
Yeah, and your boyfriend were here, and you were all out in the jacuzzi. And
I remember.
You're like, come on, Mom, do you want to come in? I'm like, no, I don't.
And let me just put a little information out there. This boyfriend at the time, this was like the first time that I was actually like meeting him, like hanging out with him. The first weekend he met my family.
Anyway, and Jeremy was going to go in with you guys. He put on his swimming trunks and everything, and a tank top, and I said, Jerry, you going in? And he goes, yeah. And I'm like, oh, thank God, I thought, well, that's good. That's really good for his psyche that he goes in and hangs with you guys. But very unusual. Jeremy was not the type to go sit in the jacuzzi whenever we were all in there.
Especially with a new person that I'm bringing home, yeah.
Well, and hang with us, whether or not your friend was there. He just wasn't that happy. He just didn't embrace life that way. And so then he went in his room, and about 5 minutes went by. I remember watching this TV show, and I hear this thud on the floor. We had wood floors. And I'm like, oh, what is he doing now? I thought maybe he's throwing a ball around in the room or playing with Gus or dropped something, whatever. And I just remember thinking, you know what? I'm not going in there. And, to clean up the mess or whatever. And then finally something said, get up and go look. And I did. I went to his room, and the door was locked. Or it wasn't locked. I think it was locked. And I had to pick the lock. And then I was opening the door, and something was against it. And I was pushing. And I finally opened it, and it was Jeremy laying on the floor. And he had a big gash on his forehead. And I just remember thinking, Jeremy, what happened? And I remember looking up and seeing his needle, filled with heroin with a brown liquid and a spoon. And I'm like, oh my God, he's shooting up, Because all this drama that happened was before he started shooting up.
When he was just smoking.
And I thought, oh my God, and I went to the room across the way, and I said, Ed, come in.
I'll take it from here, because we were all in the jacuzzi, and then all of a sudden we just hear this, no offense, this just blood-curdling scream that was like, Ed! And at first we couldn't hear it clearly. We kind of thought it was you just like yelling to us, like joking around or something. So we didn't take it seriously. And then we heard a second one 10 seconds later, like, Ed, at the top of your lungs. I've never seen my dad run in his life. Ever. I've never seen Ed run in his life. He jumped out of the jacuzzi so fast. I followed. I remember him running inside, almost slipping, cracking his head open on the wood, literally, because he was just running. I slid after him, We ran. I just remember running up the stairs and just seeing Jeremy's feet there in the door and seeing you panic and like, call 911, just screaming like this huge scene. And I just remember going outside and just sitting on the driveway and just thinking like, oh my God, my brother's dead. Like, he's dead. And then I'm sitting there, and then the paramedics come up, and oddly enough, a situation like this has happened to me a few times, but it's every single time it happens, you're never prepared for it, and they're like, it's like a movie scene, and they all start coming in, and, like, oh, where is he? Where's the room? And I couldn't even talk. I'm just, like, outside crying, like, in a bikini, literally shivering, like, so beside myself. And then I remember them going in, and I was just outside, and it was just madness with the little dogs barking and craziness. And then I remember going inside and sitting on the living room couch so I could see the stairs. And I remember he was strapped down, and they were bringing him down on that stretcher or whatever. And I just remember him looking up and saying, "Mom, I'm sorry." And I felt like at that point, you can't explain like what goes through your head. I think that I was more than anything thankful that I heard him speak because I knew he was alive. But it was just, that was the first overdose that happened, right? That was the first one, and he went through a couple. But yeah, I mean, from that moment on, it just changed everything. Mm-hmm. Everything.
Well, from my view, because I found him and I, looked up and found the syringe, I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? And I went and grabbed my phone. I went and called Ed. You did nothing. And that's when, and I went back and I had 911 on the line. I put it on speaker. And they said, "Is he breathing?" And I said, "He's got very shallow breathing." And then all of a sudden, he started turning blue.
Oh, God.
And that's when I went and screamed for Ed, and, all that started. And the 911 person, was so crazy up there. And Eddie's like, "Be quiet," and the 911 person chaos. Is like, coaching him through how to resuscitate him and get blood back going. And I mean, Eddie just picked him up and threw him down, like not all the way up, but he just picked him and flipped him over onto his back.
Yeah.
And started pumping away. And by that time, the paramedics got there, and the firemen got there, and they're so big with all their equipment. All of a sudden, the space was like teeny tiny, and we were squished.
It's just so chaotic and frantic. I think that's why I didn't even go in, because there were so many people.
Yeah, and then Gus was on the bed, and everybody's saying, "Can you take care of the dog?" And Gus is a pit bull, and even the emergency workers were like, "Can you get rid of the dog?" Because that's the last thing they need is the dog charging at him or something.
Yeah.
And Gus was frozen. He was just frozen, shaking. He couldn't move. He wouldn't move. And I finally said, "Gus, come on." And I took him in the other room, and they took him in the landing so they would have a little bit more room. And I think they gave him Narcan to revive him. And I said, I think he OD'd on heroin. I found this. And so they were reviving him and doing all that. And, I just remember staring at the whole situation, and I was numb. It was like a movie.
It's like an out-of-body experience, right? That's how every single situation that's happened with him has been. You're just like out of body watching this happening. Like, this isn't my life. Is this my life?
It just unfolded in front of me, and I was like, and everybody else left. You were crying, Ed was crying, everybody was crying, and I couldn't cry. I'm like, because I wanted to take in every second, of what he looked like, because I thought, remember, everybody was crying in other rooms and everything, and I couldn't move, and I wouldn't move, and I just remember staring at him. And just staring at him. I looked at his face, I looked at his body, I looked at his arms, I looked at his feet, I looked at his legs, I looked at, what he was wearing. And then, I just stared, because I remember thinking, this is the last time I'm gonna see you. And right then, they revived him, and he opened his eyes. And you know what the first thing he said was? "Where's my dog?"
That's what he said.
Oh my God. I'm going to clobber you.
Yeah.
But like you, it's like, it was such a relief that he was talking. And I was just, And the firemen were doing their thing, and then they had to take him down the stairs, and I remember him looking up at me and saying, "Mom, I'm so sorry," you know?
Yeah.
And he was crying, and I remember saying, "Jeremy, you died tonight." He literally died, and they revived him. And so after that, you know, I went to see him in the hospital, and like, not that night. I just like, I can't go, you know? If I go, it's almost like saying it's okay what you did.
Yeah.
And it was not okay. And so I went the next day, and he was so remorseful, and he was bawling, and, you know, because he was a good person.
Yeah.
And I just said, "Jeremy, you got to go away. You know, you need to go to rehab, but for 6 months, you need to really, you know, do it." And I questioned, you know, and they lock you down for 72 hours because, you know, they don't know if it was a suicide attempt. And I said, "Jeremy," and he said, "No, Mom, I was not trying to kill myself. I want to live." And, you know, then he came home a day or two later and again was just so remorseful. And he was so agreeable to getting help that time. And that's when we put him in a second time.
I remember that too, because he came home and, you know, you're like, he was there for 2 days. I didn't go and see him. And it's so hard too to point that out. Like, just when you said it, like, I didn't go and see him because I didn't want him to think it's okay. Back then, at that time, I probably would have looked at you and been like, "What are you doing?" and this and that. But people don't realize that you making that decision to not go was probably harder than making the decision to just go and see him. You know what I mean? Because like you said, he's not a bad person. And so he was so remorseful. And when he came home that day, I just remember, like, seeing him and seeing this huge gash on his forehead and literally just having flashbacks to, like, seeing, because they wouldn't let me go in the room. All I could see was just like him laying down. I just saw like his feet, like a crime scene, you know, when they don't show the body, just the feet. And he had a huge gash on his head, and me and Jeremy were close, but we could have been closer. And I just remember, like, not even caring if he thought it was weird. I just ran up and gave him the biggest hug and was just like, so relieved that he was alive. Like, nothing, and that's also, like, I never punished him. Like, nothing bad he ever did, I never punished him for it. And some of my friends would be like, "Why aren't you mad at him? And he's just gonna keep doing that and this and that." But I could never be mad at him. At that moment, I didn't care that he overdosed or anything. I was just so happy that he was alive.
Well, I think when you have an addict in the family, like you said, there's so much drama, but you evolve.
Yeah.
I mean, I think your skin gets thicker.
Definitely.
You know? I mean, I still remember, you know, as a mother, and I'm sure you as a sister, like, you are always thinking, is this the night? You know, is he going to die tonight? And so after that, we did send him away, and, you know, we did what we could, and, you know, he went out and he stayed clean for about 4 months and went right back to using. And, you know, when I say go right back to using, that's because the predators, the dealers, are right there. Okay? They'll deliver to your door when I'm not home. They'll deliver at the corner. They'll deliver behind 7-Eleven. You know what? And they contact you, "Hey, what's up?" You know, that's code for, you know, I got something for sales. So the second rehab, you know, lasted for a while. I don't even know how long, but there was a third rehab, and that, again, came at our insistence when, you know, I found out we went away for a weekend, and he did some things I was, you know, really disappointed with, and I said, "You need to move out. You know, January 1, you need to be gone." And he at that time said, "Mom, I want to try again. I want to go back to rehab." And I said, "I love you for that, you know, thank you." And so we supported him again. And he got out and he was doing well. And we went to an Easter celebration at our friend's house, and he agreed to go, and he stayed all day. And I remember coming into his room and saying, thanks, Jared, for going. I really appreciate it. I know these things are hard for you. He was laying face down on his bed. He goes, I know, okay. And so whatever, went a few weeks or a week or two went by, and all this time he had been studying to become an EMT on his way to become a fireman. And he managed to pass his test. He was clean when he did it. And he had finally gotten a real job, like in a hospital, that was actually going to pay him, more than $10 an hour. And he was excited. And I said, congratulations, and blah, blah, blah. Jeremy and I were very, very close. I probably should back up and put that in there at some point. But anyway. And so he said, Mom, I need to get some, khakis and just a white polo, which I think he had. And so he had gone out that night. It was April 25th, and he had gone out that night he'd worked with Ed all day, and they came home late, and he had gone out to get pants, and he came back, and he was like all like sweaty and just like really, really high. I'm like, Jeremy, what did you take? What did you do? Like, your life starts tomorrow, literally. We've been working for years to get you here. And he said, Mom, nothing. And so I went to bed. It was late. We were tired. And I said my prayers again for him. And, when you have an addict, especially a child, you don't know. They could go anytime. You could get the phone call saying, I'm sorry, we have your son. Or, Jeremy lived at home with us at the time he passed. And every night, every morning I wake up and I'm like, please, God, let him be alive, And that's the life you live. And those are the thoughts you have when you have an addict. And my friend Pat always calls that walk the walk of death. When you walk from your room to the addict's room, what's behind that door. And, I remember there were times when Jeremy didn't live in the house, and I would literally text him every morning, are you alive?
I remember
Are you
that.
alive? And, think about that,
I remember also, too, kind of weird, but I just remember anytime I heard an ambulance or a police siren for at least 2 years, I was triggered by it, just literally, because all the other times it was because they were coming to my house because Jeremy had overdosed. So I literally, anytime I would hear an ambulance, my heart would stop. And I would pick up the phone and call you, or I would text Jeremy or someone in the family to make sure, like, everything was okay.
Right. I know. So then the morning that he passed, it was April 26th, 2017. And that was the day he was supposed to start his new job as an official EMT at a hospital. And he'd gone out and gotten pants, and we washed them. And I woke up at 5 a.m. that morning to make sure that he put his pants in the dryer. Now keep in mind, Jeremy's 26, and I'm still kind of overseeing his laundry. Okay, not every day, but that. And I folded him, and I thought about, should I take him in there? But it was so early, and I thought, no, he's got a 12-hour shift today. I'm not going to wake him up. And so I just left him there, and I fell back to sleep, and I didn't wake up till maybe 7:30, and I woke up and, I thought, oh my gosh, today's his first day of work. And he said, Mom, I have to leave the house by 8 o'clock. And so I'm like, oh, I want to get up and I want to see him off, see if he's hungry, make him something. And I remember, calling his name and going and knocking on his door. And I said, Jer, are you up? And Jer, come on, are you here? And then I don't know what to tell you. It's like I got this panic, this feeling in my gut that, oh my God, and you just go cold from top to bottom. And I thought, okay, go look in the front, see if his car is there. Maybe he slipped out and I was asleep, whatever. And his car was parked in the driveway. And I thought, oh my God. And I knew, and I went and I was, turning the knob, pounding on the door. He knows he wasn't supposed to have the door locked. And he never did. And he did that night. And I went and I broke into his room and I found him slumped over his bed. And I'm like, Jeremy, and he was still dressed, like in his night clothes. And I'm like, Jer, what are you doing? You gotta go. And then I thought, oh, he's playing like some sick game, because sometimes he was like, we'd try and tease me or whatever. And I'm like, Jeremy, and I went up to shake him. And there was no movement. And I'm like, oh my God, is this the moment, Because for years I always thought, how is he going to die? What's it going to be like when that day comes? And I shook him and I kind of turned him over. And there was, no motion in his body. And I could see that, his eyes were closed and he was blue and he was dead. And I just remember shaking him saying, what did you do? I was hysterical. And I went, I got my phone, I called 911, I put him on speaker, and I said, my son just overdosed and I think he's dead. And she said, put him on the ground and we're gonna start resuscitation. And I said, he's already dead. And she goes, try it anyway. And so I've got 911 on the way, whatever, is there anybody there with you? I'm like, no, there's nobody here. And so I had to start resuscitating him and I knew it was useless. But that first press, down, I could just hear like the last breath out of his body. And then the paramedics came again, the firemen. And poor Gus was just again on the bed, just like shell-shocked. And I remember he was, okay, we'll take over from here. And I remember looking up again on his table, and there was his syringe again, filled with heroin. And I thought, well, that's so odd. Why is it full and he's dead, And as it turned out, he died from a fentanyl overdose. And so all that happened, and Rebecca comes running in, and I could hear her coming up the stairs saying, Mom, Mom. And she tells me, I don't remember, and I said, don't come in here. Don't come in. And that was before the paramedics got there. And of course she came in and saw, and, was hysterical. And after that, they had wanted to take him away. It became a crime scene at that point. So they kicked me out and they worked on Jeremy and they, whatever they did. And then they were wheeling him out. And I was talking to all the detectives and the coroner and the pastor, whoever had come. And again, I was just like, I can't believe it. Like, it's like when you have a baby for the first time, your baby, like you look at it and go, oh my gosh, that's what you look like, And for me, like seeing Jeremy, it was like, oh my gosh, this is how it happened. Like, this is how your story ends, And I remember they wanted to wheel him out, and I said, I want to see him before he goes. And they all said, no, you don't want to see him. He doesn't look good.
His face has changed.
Yes. And I said, you know what? I found him. I want to see him. And me and Dad went over to him, and they unzipped him just so we could see his face. And we talked to him. And we prayed over him. And then, we all said our goodbye. And then we said, okay. And I just remember thinking, that the last time I saw my son, he was being carried away in a body bag. And, every time I do a talk or a podcast now or a newsletter or, it's almost like we relive that day, we relive the events, but we have to get through it and we have to just push on, Mm-hmm.
Well, my experience that day was the same but different. I was working at Cadence, so I remember it was weird. I remember, there were some days that I went and I dropped my dog off at your house to hang with the other dogs while I was at work all day. And I don't know if I had like a schedule or I don't know. There were certain days that I always went, but I left my house and I remember thinking like, oh, I'm going to go to my mom's today for whatever reason. It was a day that I wouldn't have normally, gone to drop the dog off. And I just thought like, for whatever reason, I was like, I'm going to go there today. Like something was calling me. So, it's a good morning. I'm on my way and I'm driving and I get to my parents' street. And I just remember seeing an ambulance turn the corner right in front of me, and my heart sank, and I feel so bad saying this and admitting this, but I had seen the ambulance at my neighbor's house before. And I just started praying to God that they were there for my neighbor and not for my brother. And I followed the ambulance up the street, and sure enough, they pulled right up in front of my mom's house. And I parked in the garage, or I parked in the driveway, and just from that moment on, it was like a crime scene, like what you see in the movies. I jumped out of my car, like didn't even get my dog, just jumped out of my car, left the door open, and my parents' two front doors were already just wide open. And I rushed in, and as I was going up the stairs, the only thing I could hear was my mom counting 1, 2, 3, and then I heard her say, "Come on, Jeremy." And I knew at that moment what had happened, and I got to the top of the stairs, and my mom said, "Beck, don't come in here." And sometimes I really do wish that I listened to you and I didn't go in, but I did. I knew I had to be there for my mom. And I went in, and I just saw my mom holding my brother's dead body. And I saw his face, and his body, and his feet, and I just broke down. I'm sorry, I can't. So I got to the top of the stairs,
And I walked in and I saw you holding Jeremy, and his face was blue and he had blood coming down his nose. And I just remember running to the den and just screaming. I collapsed to the floor. I literally couldn't hold myself up. I collapsed to the floor and I just started bawling, I think for maybe 5 minutes, and then I remember like the paramedics and everyone like rushing in and finding me and asking me to go downstairs and, get all the dogs, and so I did. And one of the first thoughts that I had is, why did my mom have to be the one to find him? Because, as you said before, like, you didn't say Jeremy, you said we. Like, we were so close to getting you what you wanted because you were always his partner and you were always trying. And I just felt so devastated that you had to be the one to walk in and find him. And I sat outside and I didn't know what to do, and the only thing I could think is I had to call people, so I picked up the phone and I called Daniel, and I remember he was in the Navy and he didn't answer, and I just kept calling and calling until he did. And the last thing I wanted to do is have to tell him over the phone that Jeremy had passed, but I did. And then I remember calling Kara, and within 15 minutes, her mom was over at our house, and, and then I was outside with the dogs, and I was just in shock. And after I had called, I called his friends, I called Mateen, Zach, Matt, Dad, all of them, and EJ, and I told them. And when I was sitting outside, I just didn't, I don't even know how to explain what I was feeling. Like I said, it was out of body, just watching it happen. And the cops were all, like you said, it was like a crime scene. The cops were coming up to me and asking me questions about Jeremy, like, who did he hang out with? Do you know who he got this from? And I'm just, no offense to the police and everyone, but I'm just sitting here thinking, screw off. Like, I don't want to talk to anyone about anything right now. But I understood the importance of getting all the information and details right away, and it was a crime scene because it was considered manslaughter for whoever sold the stuff. But it was probably one of the worst, it was the hands down worst day of my life. And I didn't actually, before all of that happened, when I was walking, when I said that I had this feeling that I needed to go there. And it was just, I don't know how to explain it, but it's almost like I knew that I needed to be there for you. I don't know how to explain it, but I knew that something bad was going to come of it. And I just remember when I got there having that feeling and just like, this is it, like you said, and you can picture it in your head so many times. And I remember there was a point in my life where I would say, like, my brother's gonna die from an overdose, like, I just have to accept it, trying to make myself feel better and comfort myself.
Well, you try to rationalize it, over the years, because it's a real fear and it's a reality.
But when it happened, obviously there's no preparing for it. And
nothing prepares you.
And then it happened, and then I just had so many questions, like, why? Because it was in that span of 4 months that he was doing really, really well, and that's a whole nother component of it. But he was doing really well, and he was on Vivitrol shots, and it was a fault or something, a flaw in his medication and when he needed to get it. And I remember my mom on the phone with them, the doctors, telling them, do you understand this is a matter of life or death if he gets this shot? Do you understand? And I remember you that week before just being so frantic, trying to figure it out, trying to get him that shot or anything, because it's almost like you knew, you know? And so that, it was just, I mean, we're so lucky for all the friends and family that we have. Everyone flooded us with love and comfort, and I don't know that we would have been able to get through it without them, but, you know, now that he's gone, we're still being affected. I mean, I was depressed. I was diagnosed with depression, and I've been dealing with that for 2 years, and I think it's something that never really goes away. You know, we live with the pain every day, but the whole point of us being so vulnerable and sharing this story is because we hope that it'll make an impact on someone, and we hope that it'll bring awareness to this deadly drug that is in our town, that people are ignorant to and think that it's not going to happen to them, because guess what? I was that person. We are the closest family, and we had dinner every night at 5 o'clock, and we went to church together, and on holidays, and, you know, we would go hang out with our family. Like, this, if this were going to happen to anyone, it shouldn't have been us, but it was. So that's why we are here making this show, in hopes that it positively affects at least one person or one family.
It is the most devastating thing we have ever been through. But I remember walking at the park one day, walking Gus, because I now inherited him, and walking and just feeling so hopeless, like how this is such a huge epidemic. You know, I'm helpless against this. This is like David and Goliath. You know, heroin is Goliath. And I thought, and it just, the words came into my head that said, you are not helpless. And at that moment, it just struck me, you know it was God talking to me, and it just struck me that we have to do something. We are not just going to spend the rest of our days crying. We are going to help other people who are addicts and who can't break this cycle. We're going to help them do it. And so we formed a foundation in Jeremy's name. And that's what our cause is. We're here to help the addicts, the families. You know, we get it. We've been there. And even if we help, one person, then we've been successful. And so far it's 4 people, and we hope to have many more. But we can't, something like this happens and you don't just lay down, okay? Or we don't. It's like we're fighting back. We're doing our part to, help victims of the opiate epidemic. We have no judgment for the addict. I know when this first happened, and I thought, oh my God, all my neighbors know, people at school know. I was embarrassed. I'm like, they're going to think this was bad parenting. Mm-hmm. That's what they're going to think. They're going to think, oh, well, she always worked, or, they were too liberal, or they're going to say something, and that I felt very, very judged. But in actuality, nobody judged me, and everybody was so supportive. And during that time, I had 5 other families come to me and say, we have the same thing going on in our family. We have addiction. My so-and-so is addicted to meth. This one is addicted to heroin. This one is addicted to pills. All 5, and all 5 from our neighborhood, from our community. And that's when I knew, you know what? We have to do something. We can't just sit by and do nothing. We're not built that way. And I think maybe God shows us, and then gave us the strength to carry on, because certainly my life would be a lot less stressful if I didn't have to keep reliving this story,
Mm-hmm.
In the hopes of helping other people. But it's worth it. It's worth it if we help others. Jeremy was a wonderful son. He was a wonderful boy. He had a huge heart. And you know what? You talk to other parents of addicts and they'll describe their child that way too. Funny and, bright. He was athletic. He was so kind. And addicts tend to be very, very sensitive. So we're here to help.
You just heard the podcast $20, produced by Rose and Rebecca Castro and Bertie DeQuay, recorded at the New Media Agency Studios in Los Angeles.